Okay, hi everyone once again, and welcome to today's session. So today we're going to hear from the third member of the GramAdapt project. So Kaius basically introduced all of them. So now we get to know more about them as we proceed through our course. So our today's guest is Panagiotis Kapellis, who recently defended his master's thesis at the University of Helsinki, and he was also involved in the GramAdapt project, as you already know. And today he's going to present the results of his work. And the title of the talk is Getting Sociolinguistic Information from Context-Induced Grammatical Changes. So we are very happy to have you here, and thanks for agreeing to take part in this course. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me add, first of all, in the University of Helsinki, we don't have a defense for master's thesis, so I just submitted it. But anyway, yes, so welcome everyone. First of all, this master's thesis, even though I was part of GramAdapt, and I mean, it's a minor spoiler, but it's okay, since anyway, this master's thesis is not actually part of GramAdapt, but it takes heavy influence from it, and you'll see how and why. So the title is Getting Sociolinguistic Information from Context-Induced Grammatical Changes. And what exactly do I mean by this? So first of all, we know by now, I hope, that languages can change due to contact with other languages. This is quite evident in, I think, also our daily lives if we check even our knowledge of other languages, but even our own very often. And we know by now, during this course, I hope you've seen that these changes are motivated by the sociolinguistic context in which the contact happens. So this might mean the intensity of the contact. It might mean specific, like how exactly the contact happens, in what domains of sociolinguistic exchange this contact happens. But in any case, the sociolinguistic environment affects the contact. And as I said, I mean, it affects everything. It can affect everything, as far as I know. So lexicon is pretty commonly used as an example for this. So borrowing, phonology, morphology, etc. GramAdapt studies or tries to find out what kind of contact what kind of contact induces what kind of changes in all of these domains. But a question that arose to me, at least, from this is if the sociolinguistic environment is what affects contact, can we see from the effects of the sociolinguistic environment what that is? So from, in this example, from the grammar, can we see anything actually about the sociolinguistic environment? And for this, as was spoiled, GramAdapt is what I chose to use. It just so happened, I don't know, it happened to find my way. Yes. Not because I knew the people. But anyway, it's not really ideal for what I want to do. And the reason for this is that, first of all, if we want to know, if we want to compare the actual, if we want to compare the results of the contact on, in this case, the grammar of the language, how do we do this typologically, and how do we represent the sociolinguistic environment as a number? Maybe Eddie has found a way to do this by now. When I was writing my master's thesis, this wasn't really a thing yet. It wasn't known how exactly to do this. So what I did was, I wouldn't say I invented this, but I took sociolinguistic dominance as something that I could measure. So in this case, I define it as a language is more dominant than another in a contact scenario if it is more used across relevant social domains. And the social domains you probably encountered with Eddie. So that's what I mean. So if a language is more used in trade and exchange and marriage, for example, than the other, it is more dominant. And all other contexts, some other language is used, let's say. So the first language is then the one that's more used is more dominant. And this is easier to represent than just saying the environment. But this also requires looking at contact effects from both sides. And now by sides, I mean the languages, the two languages in contact. So both languages can affect each other. And this, of course, can happen also simultaneously. So in a contact scenario, there can be changes from one language in the contact scenario. So one language can affect the other in the contact scenario, and also the other can affect the first. But GramAdapt, in the GramAdapt framework, this isn't really taken into account, or at least in the calculations. Of course, they know this, but it's not taken into account in the framework itself. So what GramAdapt did, probably Kaius said this well enough that you remember. It looks at what effects the focus language has had on the neighbor language. And this, of course, doesn't exclude then that the neighbor hasn't had an effect on the focus. It just isn't taken into account in GramAdapt. So again, as a reminder, what GramAdapt does. So GramAdapt takes a contact scenario to be contact between two languages, one of which it calls the focus language and the other the neighbor. The focus language is the language being affected by the neighbor. And to measure these contact effects, they, of course, need some sort of baseline to know if the focus changed. How did it change? In what respects? So they take a third language, which they call the benchmark. And this is the closest possible relative, which is not in the contact scenario. The closest possible relative of the focus language, which is not in the contact scenario. It's important for it to not be in the contact scenario, obviously, because you don't want any effects that you can't account for. And yes, the relative is obvious. So a classic example everyone always in GramAdapt shows is this of Sicilian. Maybe not like this, but they show this example. So Maltese here is the focus language. Sicilian is the language that they call the neighbor here. So Maltese is the language they look for changes in from Sicilian. And to account for these changes, to be sure that they are changes due to contact, they take a benchmark. In this case, they took Gulf Arabic. And you can see here the glottolog tree. You can see it's fairly close. It's not actually the closest, but it's always better to be sure that it's not in the contact scenario than that it is literally the closest language genetically. Yes. So this they replicated across the world for quite a few autotype areas, and this is the results they have. It's 47 sets. They call these sets of languages. You know all this probably. So what exactly did they look? Or let's say, what did I do then to account for this? Well, I added another benchmark. The way, a benchmark for what they call the neighbor language. So in the exact same way that they did it, because you want to account for changes that happen in neighbor due to the focus also. So why not do the exact same thing they did for the focus? In this case, this may be a little confusing, but I think it's better like this. I changed a little bit the terminology so that it doesn't get confusing, but I call the languages in contact with each other contact language 1 and contact language 2, and then the related languages they have the same number. So let's see. In the same case, could you actually, can anyone think what's a good candidate for a neighbor benchmark? So this has to be a related language to Sicilian in this case, that is not in contact, that must not have been in contact with Maltese or Gulf Arabic. This probably should include other versions of Arabic also if you really want to avoid contact effects. So can anyone throw out a language that's related, closer enough related to Sicilian and wouldn't be in contact with this branch, let's say, of Afroasiatic? That is an option. I chose not to take that one because it's still close enough geographically to Arabic, and there's probably been some trade with Arab traders, etc. I'm not a historian, obviously, but it wouldn't be that far-fetched. There might be no linguistic influence, but still you want to avoid it in any case.
Yeah, for those who are watching the recording, the idea was Napolitanian, so you probably will not see the chat, but yeah.
That standard Italian was also an option. It's further away. Even there, I actually would say the same. It's better to be too cautious than too strict with the rule of it having to be very closely related. So just don't say Romanian. Romanian, yes, is an option. Latin, yes, but this is synchronic. Actually, it doesn't have to be synchronic. So Latin would be a very good candidate. It just so happens that GramAdapt doesn't really work synchronically. GramAdapt chose not to choose benchmarks diachronically. Sardinian, I see, Dalmatian, and Romanian. So Sardinian, I think, is a little too far from the other ones genealogically. It's considered to be in a different branch of Romance than the other ones. But I also ended up with either Romanian or Dalmatian as my options. And well, I hope Laszlo is happy with this, because I didn't choose Romanian, I chose Dalmatian. Just for those who didn't see the chat, who can't see the chat, Laszlo said here, just don't say Romanian. And I didn't. I mentioned it, but I didn't. Yes, so I chose Dalmatian, but you see the reasoning here. It's close enough. Actually, Glossolog says Standard Italian, Southern Italian, and Dalmatian Istriot are the best choices. Of course, if you ask any Romance expert, any what's the term? Romanist. Any Romanist, they would tell you this is debatable, this classification, but Dalmatian is a good enough option along with Romanian. The exact linguistic features that GramAdapt looked at were probably explained to you again by Kaios on Monday. What I took was two of them, two linguistic overall features, which is number marking and possession marking in noun phrases. And so to get a sense of what exactly this means, there are always questions, yes or no questions, pertaining to number marking and possession in noun phrases. So here's a few examples. So for number marking, a question would be, is the singular marked on nouns? Is the singular marked on personal pronouns? Is the plural marked on verbs? So can it be? And you just say yes or no to these. Is number marking obligatory, etc., etc.? Is number marking cumulative with gender? So meaning, is there an affix or any marker that marks both at the same time? Or is it syncretic with any of these? In the example I have here for English, in runs, the S is syncretically marks both present tense and third person and singular number. And also it is syncretic with respect, number is syncretic with respect to person and also tense, since it doesn't, the S, no marker exists for other tenses or persons in the singular or the plural. Possession in noun phrases is similar. Again, yes or no questions. Is there head marking? Does head marking or dependent marking or whatever marking occur with noun possessors? So can is the, when the possessor of a possessive phrase is a pronoun, let's say, is it is that what receives the marking? Is the pronoun what receives the marking, or can it also be the noun that receives the marking, or neither of the two, etc.? What is the most common order of head independent? So is the head first, is the possessee first in the noun phrase, or is the possessor first? Yes, so an example here, easy for me. a Finnish example. So in the first case, you can see that Finnish does have dependent marking, and it also has head marking. And with possessive, when the possessor is a pronoun. Also, the marker comes after the dependent and after the head, in the case of head marking. However, Finnish, when the possessor is a noun, does not allow double marking, this kind of double marking. Instead, it has to be dependent marking. So the possessor is the one that receives the marking. However, Finnish doesn't have, let's say, prefixes. So the marker occurs always after the word it's attached to. Here's an example for I forget the name of the language. It'll come up later, I think. But this is for number marking. So there is singular, there is plural, and number is marked both with an affix, as you can see in the second example, and in the first one also, and it can be marked with by a change of the vowel. It can be marked by reduplication, which I think in all of these it is at the same time in almost all of these. So there can be multiple at the same time. And yes, but the important thing is that for all of these features, you answer yes or no. Another one, another example of possession, that maybe these are already familiar to you. So the sociolinguistic features, what I talked about in the beginning also, that this wasn't figured out yet when I did my thesis. So there might be a much better way to do it if I had to do it now. But what I ended up with is I chose this list of questions for marking my dominance, for marking dominance of the language. So the criteria were that there had to be a pair of questions, of course, because you have to be able to say something about the dominance of both of the languages. So you have to be able to say whether a language is, whether in this case, language one is dominant in every, you have to be able to say, for example, in trade, is language one, you have to be able to compare questions. You have to, so in the original questionnaire, not all questions had these sorts of pairs where, for example, in the first case, what language do C1 so contact language one speakers typically speak during practices of exchange with contact two speakers. There were some questions where only the dominance of the first language was in question, because GramAdapt had the focus of oh, sorry, the second language, because GrammarDAP had the focus of the neighbor affecting the focus and not the other way around. So I wouldn't say it was assumed that only the neighbor is the one affecting the focus, but at least in the sociolinguistic questionnaire, it sort of seemed so. There weren't these sorts of pairs. Another criterion was that there had to be, it had to be sort of equal. The strength of the answer of each of the questions had to be equal across the domains. So this is because after all of these are, they get the answers for all of these get a number basically. So if the first one is, if the answer to the first one is that the contact language one is a stronger one, then this gets a 1 for. Actually, I'll explain that later. I'll explain later how they get values. Yes, sorry, this is a little. Anyway, I hope you get the point. They had to be of equal strength. And of course, I had to take questions from all of the sociolinguistic domains. At least I tried to. But of course, this isn't perfect, exactly because I had to take them by hand, and there was really no evidence for why these are the exact questions to take. So take them with a grain of salt. But then what exactly to do with this? So what GrammarDAP did, as Kaius probably showed you already, is something like this. So for each feature, which is each yes or no question, every language gets a yes or no. And basically, a 1 in this case means that there is positive evidence for this feature having changed due to contact. A 0 meaning there's actually positive evidence for that not to have. Or is then, how does this work? Yes, there's positive evidence that it hasn't changed. So it could have changed, it hasn't. Because of me taking a 4th language in each set, this has to be complicated a little bit, of course. So this is what I did. You don't have to worry exactly about this. It's not particularly important at this stage, but if you're curious how exactly I did this, this is how. So you could, from this, take, just add them all up and divide them by the amount of possible yeses, which is probably, guys also probably talked to you about this. And this is what is called the contact score. But how to represent this is then this. So this is a beta distribution. And it just better shows you the confidence in which these the confidence we have for the changes. So in red is a hypothetical contact score of 1 out of 2. So what this means is there's 2 features which could have changed due to contact, but only one of them did. And then let's say there's another pair of languages in which out of 10 features which could have changed. So by could have changed, we mean we have some sort of evidence for, we can say something about it. Only half of them did again, but because it's 5 out of 10, we have a higher confidence that this is due to that we have a higher confidence for what we're saying because we have more evidence, basically. Yes. Do you have any questions so far, or we could actually take a little break, if that sounds good? So the actual results. One problem that came up when I was doing this was that the linguistic sets are not the same as the ones in the sociolinguistic data set, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, but anyway. What I did then, of course, was because I have to compare the sociolinguistic data with the linguistic data, I have to take the ones that are in both. So the sets for which there are languages in both. So this is the final set of languages that I came up with. And then the related languages of those, the ones in italics, are the ones that I had to add and code for. So I went through this process. If I remember correctly, the number data had 50 something questions, and the other one, the possessives, had like 150, I think, questions, yes or no questions. Yes, so sifting through grammars and finding the grammatical information necessary. So then with the beta distributions that I talked about, what you get is this. So this is actually for number marking. The one on the left is the likelihood of so language 1 having affected language 2. So in GrammaDapt terms, this is the focus language having affected the neighbor language, and on the right is the neighbor language having affected the focus language. So the right ones are basically exactly what GrammaDapt would show, and the left ones is what you get with the neighbor benchmark. And here the strength or the height of the graph is the probability density or the confidence we have in the result. Then what I did for these is I basically took 50,000 random data points from each. So if you look at, I don't know, say, can you see my cursor when I do this? Okay, so let's say set 1, you take 50,000 random data points from this and 50,000 random data points from this, and each of those data points you you take the difference of, so one minus the other, and what you end up with is this. So this is again for number marking, and this represents a negative number represents the focus having had more effect on the neighbor, and a positive number, the neighbor having had more effect on the focus. As you can see, the results vary. There's quite a few sets for which the confidence is not really that high, at least with respect to other ones, like set 13. Actually, set 13 is a good example of what it looks like when most likely neither has had an effect on the other, with respect to number marking at least. Actually, set 13 is the focus language was South Sami and the neighbor language was Swedish. And it seems like in the case of number marking, neither really affected the other, which, if you know anything about the languages, I think you can recognize this. Yes. So then doing the same for the possession marking in noun phrases, and adding them with these gives you this sort of a result, which also looks interesting. Actually, now there's quite a few sets that don't. That are really in the middle. Is this even the right thing? If this is the next one, then I think I actually have the wrong graph. So this is the final one. A bit of a spoiler, I guess. Or this actually might be the sociolinguistic data. I can check. Yes, this is the sociolinguistic data. Now this is, and I recognize this because you can see the graphs are quite different. Here there's quite a bit of confidence, quite a bit of being in the middle, and then even when they're not in the middle, so there is confidence that there's been quite a bit of influence, so actually not influence, dominance. Yeah, it looks quite different. Actually, also keep in mind that these have 16 questions compared to the 50 or 150 of the linguistic domains. So this means that even a small change looks bigger on the graph. But and also a key point is that the sociolinguistic data, if we assume that that contact-induced change starts from the sociolinguistic level, then it seems logical that change, that you can see this sort of contact effect more strongly on the sociolinguistic level, so that there is more confidence for it being either way than in the linguistic level, in which changes might happen to one particular one specific structure, such as, I don't know, singular marking on nouns. If I think so, change starting from the sociolinguistic level means that it will likely have affected. You can likely see it throughout the sociolinguistic domains more readily than throughout grammatical domains. It's quite unlikely that everything in the grammar has changed due to contact, is basically what I mean. Actually, since this doesn't seem to have the final, no, it does. It does. It should. Yes, because these are the actual numbers. Again, out of 16, but the other ones don't really vary that much either, considering there's 50, or for number marking at least, there's 50 different features. For possession marking, 150 or so. Only a small fraction of these actually tell you something about the contact. Are there any you want to ask about? Are there any that seem interesting? Any cases? There's one I would talk about, but if you have any. These are just numbers, to be fair. Quite difficult to visualize on their own, but.
Could you please just say once again for what the numbers actually stand for?
Yes, so these are the so-called, at least for number and possession, these are the so-called contact scores. So a higher fraction basically means that, or is it the nominator is on the left, right? Nominator, denominator, yes. So a higher nominator and actually, a higher denominator means there's more evidence for whichever way. If the fraction is smaller, it means there's evidence that there is no contact effect. If it's higher, if it's a larger fraction, its value is higher. There is more evidence that there is some contact change. The numbers 2 and 1, I think, like above here, mean two having affected language, 2 having affected language 1. So neighbor to focus changes from that the neighbor has made on the focus, and this is the other way around. For dominance, a little bit different because it's dominance. It's not actually effects of change. It is linguistic dominance, or it's supposed to represent that. But you can see they don't always match. Sometimes they do. But even possession and number don't always match. For example, well, in this case they do, I guess. What is a good example? Well, here I guess let's talk about this set. In this set is, if I go back, remember it's set 14, it's Maltese, Sicilian, Gulf Arabic, Dalmatian, our favorite. This what this means or shows, I guess, is quite low confidence but still it seems that neither one really affected the other. So in this case, there is some evidence that Sicilia might have affected Maltese. In this case, there's a little bit of evidence that maybe Maltese affected Sicilian in number marking, but actually it's less than half. So not really. It's not. We can't really be that confident. In this sense, we can be more confident that not really much has happened. Also for dominance, it seems that there is no evidence that Sicilian is more dominant. So again, more used throughout social domains than Maltese. But there's some little evidence that Maltese is more dominant than Sicilian. To me, intuitively, when I saw this, that sounded funny. I don't know, weird, not really absurd, but I don't know. Is Maltese really stronger than Sicilian as a language? In this case, or I mean, I don't know, suggestions why this could be. Do you have any? And then I'll share you my thoughts, but I don't really know why. I have a theory.
Well, maybe if I could say, there is always an option that whatever measures, whatever criteria were chosen, they somehow do not capture the picture if we do not just try to measure it, but rather look into it like impressionistically. But it's hard to say. I'm not an expert in the area, so I don't know.
Me neither. Yeah. In this case, actually, I think it's because something Kaios and I talked about, which is the way the sociolinguistic questionnaire, I don't know if Eri even talked about this, but the way the sociolinguistic questionnaire was even framed. So, or the whole thing was built actually, because you can understand that, of course, Sicilian has had, or I mean, of course, it's a good candidate for looking at whether it has had effects, whether Sicilian has had effects on Maltese. But if these effects, if Maltese, if Sicilian has induced any changes in Maltese, it's probably in the past. It's not in the current day. Maltese people don't really speak Sicilian, which you can see in the results of the sociolinguistic questionnaire. These are all the results, but for the questions I have here. But they might have in the past, and they probably did. And if I remember correctly from the answers to the questions, they did when Sicilian was stronger. But now in Sicily, standard Italian is the language. No one really speaks Sicilian. Yes, yeah, exactly. It also has to do with the status of Sicilian within the region of Italy. It is. Yeah, exactly. So, but this isn't affected this isn't shown in the data. But the grammatical data doesn't really care for that. It shows whether there are changes that have taken place, but you can't really, I guess you could, but the GramAdapt sociolinguistic questionnaire, yes, well, I'll come to that. Well, the GramAdapt sociolinguistic questionnaire doesn't really ask, have there ever been these sorts of changes, and how do you even measure the intensity of contact through time in specific? How do you ask that? Who's an expert on this, etc.? These are questions. Yes, well, Maltese is the national language of Malta. I think that's actually where the 2 out of 16 you see on the other column comes from. Why this data suggests that Maltese is more dominant than Sicilian. It's because if they use one of the two languages, it's going to be Maltese. But usually, Maltese people either know Italian or they speak English with themselves, which is not reflected in the data because they're third languages outside of this. So, of course, this raises, at least for me, it raised the question, well, if this is the case for a set that I know a little bit about, what about all the other sets? Is the whole study wrong? Could it be wrong? And I guess it can, yeah, um, because we don't really know about the sociolinguistic history of all these sets. For some, we can't even know. For others, like I, as a linguist, can't go into the history of them, even if it was written. Um, so I guess I'll come to it in the end for why this is important, but I think you already get the point. Um, yes, so this is the actual final result. Um, so is this is the linguistic data, actually. Uh, and the previous one you saw was the sociolinguistic data. They don't really fit to put next to each other, so it's a little hard to um, compare the two. But as you can see, if you remember from the previous one, there's not really that many. I mean, there's spikes, but they're not that steep, as steep as these ones. Uh, you can see here there's like a lot more confidence, especially in the middle, um, meaning in numbers, all the zeros. So places where they either speak a third language or in any case, you can't really determine which one is more dominant, which one is spoken more than the other. Mhm. Whereas here, there's always some evidence for one side or the other, like almost always. But if you notice here, this number, the density, which is the confidence, here the maximum is like a little bit above 4. Here it goes to 8. So these are actually, it's a little bit misleading, but this is like on the same level as the other ones, um, meaning we're a lot less confident about these numbers, even though there is more evidence on a domain-to-domain basis, I guess. Mm. And yes, if you compare these, I guess you can find some sets. Well, set 22, if you look at that, um, is an interesting one because it's the opposite. It suggests that the sociolinguistic in the sociolinguistic domains, um, minus is focus to neighbor, so the focus is stronger, but actually there seem to be more changes that the neighbor induced in the focus. Um, I guess that sort of thing happens. Um, set 48 is another example, set 34. So there are a few. It doesn't always seem to match the dominance and the linguistic data. So yes. Before I show you what I got from the actual statistical test, would you like to guess? Would you like to guess if it was a positive or a negative result? Or I guess in between, but I'll make you choose between positive or negative. So what this would say is there a correlation between the dominance? It's a little strange. Is there a correlation between the most likely result, I guess, of the linguistic? I've always had problems with visualizing this because it's kind of, I guess it's not complex, but there's a lot of statistics and I don't like statistics. But basically, the test I ran was on the means, so on the tops of each of these. So this is the one we're most confident in, I guess. So the highest confidence is the peak, and this is the probability of change. I guess this is the of contact induced change. So the probability of contact induced change that we're most confident in, and the probability of dominance we're most confident in. So it's the is there a statistical significance? Is there a correlation between these two things? Between the dominance, the most the probability of dominance we're most confident in, and the probability of contact-induced change we're most confident in. So I guess the voting, I don't know how it could be run by reactions, I guess. It's a way to do it. So yeah, if you would like to guess.
Yeah, basically, I think that's so there is if you choose React, and so you click on it, and then there are various options like heart or thumbs up or things like that. But below that, there is also a yes or no. So a yes or a no. So you can pick either yes or no. So let's try to do that. So I guess we are voting for statistical significance versus no statistical significance, right?
Yeah, I think at least for the first one, and then yeah, let's vote like this. Yeah.
Okay, so then everyone is welcome to vote.
One vote for statistical significance. I assume this won't affect on your grade if you take this as a credited course. And this is basically just for my interest, like based on how I've described it. Does it seem more likely? And actually, the data you've seen now already, does it seem likely that there is a significance between what we can see from the sociolinguistic data and what we can see from the linguistic data? Flashed it for a little bit, but I don't think you saw it.
Yeah, it seems that people are reluctant to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have one vote for yes, one vote for no. Okay.
Yeah, I'm voting for the opposite one. So I think that there is a tendency, but I think it's not strong enough for it to be statistically significant. So that would be my vote.
Then I won't assume, but you two who voted, do you think the significance, if there was any, would be positive or negative? So is there a direct correlation between the two, or is it the opposite? So if you want to vote again, yes or no? Yeah.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. I think that intuitively makes sense, right? This is the results. It says something to those of you who know about statistics, I guess, but a p-value when it's lower than 0.05 is considered, I think, statistically significant. No, it's statistically, there's another word for it. Statistically significant is lower than 0.01. It's statistically not likely, telling, I don't remember. Anyway, it is statistically significant. Yes, in this case it is because it's lower than 0.01. And actually, I'll correct this a little bit, because there is, of course, after submission, you find all sorts of errors in everything. And one error I found was in how I calculated the beta distributions, which means they are a little bit different now. And yesterday, when I ran the numbers again, it was still a statistical significance, but a lower one. So the p-value was higher. But still, it is a positive. It was like 0.014 or something. What does this actually mean, though? Well, it means that there is a statistical significance, so they are correlated. The confidence we have in one of the two contact languages having affected the other correlates with at least this version of one of the same language being more dominant in social domains, which is interesting. Yeah, this is basically the result of the study, and this is a result that I can imagine at least one possible use case, which is when you don't have access to social linguistic data. Then it means you can, I guess this is a pilot study, so it doesn't tell you exactly how you can or what kind of information you can get, but you can at least get information for what I termed as dominance. So cases where, historical linguistic cases, for example, where you can't really always tell something about, you can't conduct a social linguistic questionnaire, basically. You don't have that part of the equation. So you can at least assume something if you see, you can at least assume that if you see a high chance of contact effects based on how GramAdapt calculated those, you can assume that most likely there is a high likelihood that also that this is affected by the sociolinguistic environment, and specifically by dominance. So there's a question, could you please tell us what are the two variables you're correlating with this test again? Yes. So it is so you have these sorts of curves for these sorts of curves for the linguistic variables and the social linguistic variables. And what I'm correlating is the mean value of the two for each set, basically. So the mean value here is the value we have most confidence in. And this was just done because of the time constraints. I could have used another, and if this ever expands into a proper article, it will have to use another statistical method which actually correlates the whole thing, because currently it doesn't really take into account the confidence. It's just the one we have most confidence in, and that's it. It's one number, and not the whole graph you see here for each set. So yeah, that's one way to expand on it. Of course, another obvious one is using whatever advances Eddie has made in her sociolinguistic questionnaire analysis. I'm not really that up to date with that, so but I think it was at least an intention to binarize also those questions, which at the time were not binarized. So they weren't yes or no questions, and there was no ones and zeros to base any actual numerical analysis on that. So yes. Is that clear enough? You can correlate two variables only whether both numerical. Mean value is yes. If there's a yes or no question, there's a categorical, as you said. Yeah, exactly. Of course, you can correlate. So the way, I mean, I guess it's a spoiler again if I ever write an article on this. But the plan would be to again take random samples and correlate those. Random samples are numerical, so you can correlate them. You can't really correlate graphs. I mean, yeah, because their ranges, you can't really, yeah, you cannot correlate two graphs, but you can correlate numbers, and by taking random samples from the graphs, you can correlate those. So there's not much more, but I'm sure I forgot something. So that's why it's so much time to ask questions, but otherwise, thank you.